Hi, folks, and welcome to the Meaningful Money Podcast. This is Season 15, Episode 12. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you put your finances in order. My name is Pete Matthew, and I'm going to share with you everything you need to know and everything you need to do to secure your financial future. I'm here to help you make sense of money. Here we are once again. Great to have you with me. Now, the conversations we have with ourselves, the sort of internal dialogue, if you like, around money, that's just vital to our successful wealth building. So today I'm bringing back repeat guest Neil Bage of BIQ to go into this vital area, the internal factors which might affect our success or otherwise on our financial journey. So I'll get into that in just a minute. After that, I'll obviously read a review that's been left, talk about what we're going to be discussing next time, all the usual stuff. Before any of that, remember, this podcast continues to be brought to you with the very kind help of my friends at 7 Investment Management. They've been helping me out here since the spring of 2011, which is an insane amount of commitment on their part, so I'm very, very grateful. Please do check out what they're up to. They're at 7im.co.uk. That's the number 7im.co.uk. Also, don't forget the Meaningful Money branded self-investment platform. If you're looking to start investing, then that might be a great option for you. meaningfulmoney.tv/podcastinvest. All the information you need to know about that before you start investing money is on that page. meaningfulmoney.tv/podcastinvest. Okay? Right, let's crack on. So I want to get straight into the conversation with Neil. Neil is the founder of BIQ, which is a behavioral insights company doing some great work on understanding how we behave around money and how we can help ourselves in that area. So, Neil did a great job last week talking about external factors. This week we're talking about internal factors. Remember, notes and links, including a transcript, which should be ready by the time this episode goes out. meaningfulmoney.tv/pp12 is the link you need. It's the only link you need. Everything you need is at that page. Okay, without further ado, here's my conversation with Neil Bage. Right, well, it's good to welcome back Neil Bage. We're continuing our conversation from last week where we talked about the external factors. It's always a bit weird doing this because it's actually all of about 90 seconds since we finished talking about the external factors, but, little glimpse behind the curtain. I'm wearing the same shirt. So let's talk about...
We should have got changed,
yes,
of course.
We should. Production values and all that, never mind. So let's talk about internal factors, Neil, right? Because... we talked last time about the sort of external stuff that we have to deal with. But for me, certainly in my life, and I'm sure it's the same for everybody, our biggest influence is our own selves and our own biases and all that stuff. I wonder if you can just give us a whistle-stop tour of, I know, how many, I've seen you do this on a slide, how many actual sort of behavioral biases are there?
Yeah. 150 maybe. They grow every day by X percent. Somebody comes up with another one every day. The easiest answer to that is there's a lot.
Yeah, okay. So, but there are probably a handful which I hear you come up with more often than not. So can you just give us a quick sort of whistle stop as to what they might be? Just again, so that we're aware of them, which I think is half the battle.
Yeah, so the ones that I kind of talk about more often than not that impact your financial journey, if you like, are present bias. So how we focus on the here and now at the detriment of the long term. Loss aversion, which is where we kind of overplay loss compared to an equivalent gain, meaning that someone will feel the pain of losing £50 more than they will winning £50.
Right.
There is disposition effect and endowment effect, disposition effect is where we sell our investments too early and we hold on to losers too long. Yeah. Endowment effect is when we own something, and that could be an investment, it could be a product, it could be a mug. When we own something, we place more value on it than actually the market values it at. That's a really interesting one.
Yeah, important.
Mental accounting, how we segment our money into different accounts in our head. Underconfidence, overconfidence, herding, probability neglect. I could go on because they all have an impact. in some degree on how we end up making important financial decisions.
Yeah. So we talked about this stuff before, and I'll make sure there's a link back to our previous conversation. I think the last season where we talked about this stuff. But it's a life's work. I mean, obviously for you, it's actually your life's work. But for those of us, who are just plodding our way towards financial independence, it's part of the journey. Is understanding this stuff and becoming increasingly aware of it. But I think half of the battle is because the journey to financial independence is a long one, okay? It's the work usually of decades, unless we're a Premiership footballer or whatever. How can we help ourselves to stay the course? How can we keep from being distracted?
You need to go on, I think you need to start by going on a journey of self-discovery. We don't do this. We're not taught to do this really, but actually sitting down and just saying, who am I really? And how do I see the world? And what's my views that I know are impacting my decisions, right? So I mentioned some in the last episode where I kind of sat down and my wife and I talk about things in an intimate way to do with money. I've been through this process myself. I sat down one day and I wanted to figure out what am I good at and what am I bad at? And it was a really brutally honest internal conversation that I had with myself. So I start writing things down and I would go, no, I'm good at this. And then I would pause and I'd go, am I really good at this? And actually, do you know what? I'm not. I can do it, but I'm not good at it. What about that? Actually, no, I'm good at, and I know I'm good at this. And feedback and external validation tells me I'm good at this. Yeah. But all of this other stuff, I know I'm not good at. And then I looked at that list and thought, right, what can I outsource? Because you know what? Not only am I not good at it, I also don't like doing half of it as well. And I don't want to do this really. So I need to outsource. And that outsourcing led me to think, right, I need to go and, for the financial part, I need to go and find a financial advisor again. I used to have one, haven't got one anymore. I need to go find a financial advisor again. And that was that conversation. But there was other things on that list where I thought, actually, do you know what? I can automate this stuff because there are apps and services available which automate this stuff. So let me tell you, one of the things I know I'm bad at is having a kind of in a committed way is saving money. So what I did is I downloaded an app, and the app's called Get Chip. Get CHIP. Yeah. And all it does is it goes into your bank account every week, I think, analyzes what your incoming, your outgoings, and says, I reckon I can take £15.35 and push it away, and Neil will never miss it. And it's automated. I never see it. I get told that it's happening, and I can stop it if I want to, but I never do. So I just ignore it, and I open up my app 2 months later and realize I've got £480 in there.
Yeah.
So automating that part of my life has been really beneficial. The other part, outsourcing, has become beneficial. And what it allows me to do is it allows me to concentrate on the things that I know I'm good at and the things where I can deliver value to my life and allow other stuff to take care of the things that I'm not good at. So I'm a big fan of automating. I'm a big fan of having that trusted advisor. I am, because I talk about it all the time, which is more of an outsourced approach, if you like. Yeah. But I'm also a big fan of sitting down and just saying, who am I? And learning about yourself.
That's great advice, actually, and not easy to do, but
it's hard.
Yeah, if you can be honest with yourself like that, there are mercifully ways that we can address those limitations, as you've said. Automation and with the increasing sort of pervasiveness of technology is good for this, but it starts with an honest conversation with yourself. And if you have a significant other, if you really want to sort of get sort of down and dirty, ask them what they think you're good at and what they think you're not good at.
Listen, you should, and I did. And that's what I mean about that external validation. You need someone to. So you say, do you think I'm good at this? Don't just tell me this because you're close to me. I want you to be honest with me. And most people are. And I'll tell you a really quick story. Years ago, when I worked in the big corporate world, I I was promoted to a supervisor, and then I was promoted to a manager. And I didn't have a big team. I was managing 9 people. And I learned then, and maybe this is where the seed was planted. I learned at that point that the one thing I know I am terrible at is managing people.
Okay.
Right. I know I'm very good at interacting with people and creating and having empathy and sympathy and all of the things you need. I know I'm good at that. Drop me in a room of 100 people and I can talk to people and I can get on their level. And because you and I have done this many times, that I know I'm good at.
Yeah.
Ask me to manage them, and I know I'm not good at it. So what I said to my boss at the time was, I need you to not put me on courses that develop a skill that not only am I not good at, I don't want to develop that skill. I don't want to become a manager, But actually what happens in the corporate world is that's all we ever strive for. We strive for promotion. I want to be a manager. I want to have people, without pausing to think, is that really what I want?
True.
Am I really good at this? Or actually is this going to end up in a big car crash? So I think maybe that's where the seed was planted, and to relate a live conversation about who am I?
Yeah, self-awareness, the start of it all, really good. Somebody once said to me, and this was actually in the context of this was in a church setting, okay, and it was actually a pastor of a church who said, we need to get better at talking to ourselves rather than listening to ourselves. And I think it's really what he meant by that was we need to try and sort of almost force objectivity on ourselves sometimes, rather than automatically listening to our subjective view of the world. I wonder, firstly, that's not easy, right? I wonder if it's even sort of fully possible. Probably not fully. I think it's probably possible to some degree. But I just wonder what you think about that. Should we be sort of continually reminding ourselves of sort of certain immutable truths, or what? I'll let you talk into that, because it's a pretty dreadfully framed question.
Do you know what? You may think that, but I love this. I love this question.
Okay, good.
At the heart of the question, I love, which is, if I'm translating the question correctly, we talk to ourselves all the time.
Yeah.
Or we hear ourselves all the time, but do we actually have that almost like a Jekyll and Hyde-esque dialogue with ourselves? And I think the answer is we should do that more, right? We shouldn't just allow the way that so I see the world, I compute the information, my internal dialogue kicks into play, and I start going, I don't think I like this. This feels a bit uncomfortable, and maybe I shouldn't do this. All internal, right? And maybe what we should do, and things I know I do, is you kind of go, really? Is that why am I uncomfortable with this? And if I can come up with a valid answer to that, then I will accept that it's uncomfortable. But what I tend to try to do, and I tell people when I speak at conferences, is you've got to, yes, go with your gut, like you mentioned a few minutes back. Yes, it serves as well typically, but we also need to be conscious that sometimes remember it's job. The job of the brain and the gut to protect us. It's a survival mechanism. If it feels uncomfortable, it basically says you need to get the hell out of here, mate. This is not good. So that's its ultimate job. So having a conversation with yourself and going, why do I feel like this? Why am I thinking this? Why do I have that view? Actually, where's that view come from? Sitting down and that learn about yourself comments, having these internal conversations are really important. The only kind of counsel I would give is don't have those conversations out loud.
Yeah, no, probably wise.
Yeah.
I've just
on a train.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I've been reading, certain books just sort of seem to rise to the top and become like the book of the moment. And one of those at the minute is Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he talks about, we tend to set ourselves goals, and usually those are goals of attainment. And that might be financial independence. We might put a number on that. I want to have £1 million in assets, by the time I'm 50 or whatever. Or it might be, I want to drop to 14 stone, or whatever, right? So we have sort of attainment goals, and he talks specifically, actually, perhaps a more effective way of thinking about it is goals for who we want to be. So, it might be, actually, financial independence would allow me to be this kind of person. It would allow me to spend this much time doing charitable work, or more time with my, I would be a better family man or woman, or whatever. And I think that's... that's a helpful thing. Certainly, I found that helpful in enabling me to be a bit more objective and asking. So for me, the longer I do this, Neil, right, the more corollaries there are between personal finance and healthy living, right? So for me, I need to be constantly asking my question. So what would a healthy person do when faced with the dessert menu, right, or whatever? And likewise, what would somebody who is financially sorted do when faced with this decision to upgrade to the iPhone 11 Pro, when actually the 10s is absolutely fine? Do you know what I mean? So I think that's been helpful for me in teaching myself to be a little bit more objective about things, rather than just listening to the default voice, which sometimes isn't helpful.
Absolutely. You're bang on, right? And this, who do I want to be? Where am I heading? What does it's not about what my future looks like, right? Because I think that's the wrong question. Mm-hmm. I think it's, who do I want to be? And so Neil Bage, right? When I sit down and I think, who do I want to be? And I look at my life now and I think, well, do you know what? I've got to be honest. In the moment, I'm pretty close to who I want to be. I love my life, and I love what I do for a living, and I love my life outside of work. So, but is that the Neil Bage that I'd like Neil Bage to be in the future? And I think, I don't know the answer to that question, but what I do know is if I live my life to be true to who I want to be today, then the natural progression of that should lead me to, in an incremental way, should lead me to the Neil Bage that I want to be in the future. So I completely get and completely agree with your what you said, that, what would a financially independent person do in this situation? What would a healthy eater do in this situation? Constantly asking yourself these questions just allows that pause and to reflect on, is this step I'm about to take the right step for me? Yeah. So I completely agree with you.
So how can we spot, how that internal subjective voice, the one where we're listening to our sort of habitual self, and it can be hard sometimes to spot that because that's the norm, right? So I wonder, is it possible for us to spot when we are displaying unhelpful behaviors? Is it even possible to be that objective?
It's kind of possible to spot them in hindsight. It's very, very difficult to spot them on the fly.
Right.
So if I'm stood in Starbucks and I'm about to order a coffee and I know I shouldn't be drinking coffee, he says, having just had a mouthful of coffee. What happens is I can kind of mute the internal dialogue.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Right? So I can go, I shouldn't be quiet. And I can do that la la la, and I can go, can I have a coffee, please? Yeah, thank you. And I can walk out.
And
I'll drink it, and then of course, and then the dialogue, I turn the mute button off, and my internal dialogue goes, "What have you done? What are you doing? Why did you do this?" And I start to question, right? So I think spotting the behavioral biases that we have and the way that they manifest themselves in the way we make decisions can very easily be recognized in hindsight, but in the moment when I'm making decisions, it is almost impossible. I would say impossible to go, oh, that's loss aversion. Oh, that's confirmation bias. Oh, that's framing. It's really difficult to do. But being aware that these behavioral biases exist and they manifest themselves in the way we make decisions is a great start.
So we need then to build frameworks, don't we? So that there are systems in place, because we know they're going to come. So we need to be prepared in advance.
Yep.
So if I know the corner shop is on my dog walking route and there's a temptation to go in there and buy something I don't need to eat, I need to put in place a framework. It's like I stopped taking money with me on my dog walk years ago, and then Apple Pay came along, and I've always got my phone on me because I'm listening to audiobooks. So what I've had to do is change. I just changed the route. Right, it's a practical thing that I can do in advance. So I will not go in that direction. So I wonder if there are some frameworks maybe that you've put in place or that you've seen others put in place to help people address these behaviors before they get to the point at which they are manifest.
So the answer is yes, and actually it kind of falls into this. I think I might be wrong, so I'll mention it anyway. In the last episode, I might have mentioned this about a thing called a commitment device. And a commitment device is a measure you put in place to prevent you from doing something. So the simplest one is, if you're a smoker, you may give your cigarettes to your wife and say, I need to ask you for a cigarette, instead of just being able to put my hand in my pocket and pull one out. That's a commitment device. Get Chip to save money automatically is a commitment device, because it takes a process away from me and it automates something that I need to do, but I'm not going to do it myself. Changing your dog walking route is in essence a commitment device. What you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to change something that allows the outcome to be the outcome I want and not be influenced by the corner shop. Now, that's all fine and good if you understand, like you have, and like I do, that there are certain behavioral biases that impact the way we make decisions, or like the savings example, I need help. I need to do something else. I'm never going to save even small amounts of money. So the kind of the first step is about self-awareness.
Yes,
it's about learning, not just going online and reading what is confirmation bias, right? That's good. It's a good step. But actually understanding how biased, to which degree you are when it comes to key behavioral biases. So when it comes to framing, how susceptible are you to marketing and the big banners in shops to go, oh yeah, but it's buy one, get one free. I might as well just get it. How susceptible are you to stuff like that? How susceptible are you to loss aversion and confirmation bias and framing and anchoring and probability neglect? Once you understand your behavioral biases and your own strengths and weaknesses in that regard, you can then understand where to focus your attention and how to put these commitment devices in place to help you make better decisions.
There's a theme here, isn't it? Self-awareness, understanding how we're like, and not just accepting that necessarily. Well, accepting it and then understanding it can change. And if we have particular weaknesses or particular behaviors that we are exhibiting more often than not, things like herding, or like you say, the endowment effect, then we need to put in place ways of dealing with that. You can't get away from self-awareness, can you?
You can't. You absolutely can't. And if you look at some of the people, look at kind of Buddhist monks, right? They meditate for a long period of time every day for a reason. And meditation, different conversation. But one of the things that they also do is they go through this whole self-awareness process of, who am I? What's my place where is my place, and what is my place on this planet? And it gives them not only the ammunition and the insight to go forward in life in a fulfilled way, it also gets rid of a load of baggage, that we carry around with us unnecessarily because we haven't sat down and said, who am I? And what you do when you go, and I've been through this, right? As I said in the previous episode, when you go through that process of just answering, who am I? You realize the crap that you get rid of. You kind of can feel your shoulders just lift, thank God I don't need to do that anymore. And it has a significant impact, not only on how you make decisions, but it has a significant impact on your overall, including your mental well-being, because all of the stresses and anxieties and worries that we have, they come from somewhere. And actually, when you can figure out that a chunk of them come from me trying to do things and live a life that's not true to myself, then what you end up with is a much more relaxed and focused way of living. And maybe that's a conversation for another day. But I'm really passionate about getting rid of the things that you're not good at and focusing on the things you're good at, and allowing other people and systems into your life to help you do the stuff that you're not good at, So collectively, you end up with a much more fulfilled life.
I think that's actually a great place to round off this conversation, Neil. So I want to say, as ever, thank you again. But you've got some exciting news, because we're recording this obviously 2-3 weeks before it'll come out. But there's some hot news from BIQ.
There is. There is some.
Are you happy to share it?
Yeah, of course, I'm happy to share it, because we alluded to this in the first time I was on your podcast. So we have been building a free consumer app, and it's available now as this broadcast. It's available in the Apple Store only to start with. So if you have an Android phone, unfortunately, you need to wait until January, but it's available now in the iOS store. And it's called MyBe, MYBE. And basically, you download the app, and what it does is it allows you to play a series, 10 at launch, behavioral bias games, that when you play the game, it reveals how that bias impacts you and your decisions. It impacts how that bias impacts your kind of financial scenarios, if you like. And more importantly, it highlights when you're making important financial decisions, which of these biases are more likely to have an impact on you. And the feedback that we've had from testing it has been that people have gone through this and absolutely see this as self-discovery. They kind of read the output report so they play confirmation bias, and they'll play the game and they'll read the output and they'll kind of go, wow, actually, now it's written in black and white like this. I can see me. That's me. And actually, the tips and tricks that we give as well, keep doing this, maybe think about not doing this. That the feedback again is from people has been, it's just really useful and meaningful insight into their unconscious behaviors. So that's on the Apple Store. Go on, download it for free, play the games. That's the latest news, and
it's
we'll be
good
updating
news,
constantly
man.
with new games. So
yeah, it's really good news. I'm delighted, because I've been waiting for this for a while, and I think I'll make sure. Obviously, there's a very prominent link to the Apple Store so that folks can download it. And Android users, you'll just have to be patient. But yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Neil, thanks again, man, for joining me. It's always good to sort of chew the fat with you and keep doing what you're doing, man. Thanks for joining me.
I will. You're very welcome. Thanks. Take care.
Okay, as last week, let me just sort of sum up the action points, really. Firstly, we need to acknowledge our inherent biases. We are gloriously human, and that means we've got all kinds of biases that we bring to every financial decision we make. Acknowledging that is the first step, if you like, to addressing it. We can never address it fully. To do so would be to cease to be human. But acknowledging it means we can start to understand it. We need to continually learn about those biases so that we can work within them, shall we say. It's important. Our financial future is at stake here. So we've got to question every decision, question the context in which it is made, and seek external ratification where necessary from people that we trust. Second thing we need to do is to harness technology to remove some decisions. Automation is really good for making decisions for us, right? So what we're doing, if you think about it, is we're making decisions in advance and then setting the technology to make the decisions in future for us. So we don't have to make those decisions repeatedly. So whether it's paying ourselves first on payday, rebalancing our portfolio, use these tools, make use of the tools available to us to remove some of the day-to-day decisions that we might not really enjoy making. Make them once, set and forget. The third thing we need to do is to develop our self-awareness. So we need to determine the areas in which we are specifically weak or which are a problem for us. We can always ask for input from trusted people on that. That's a little bit hairy at times, but have a frank conversation with yourself and your significant other if applicable, but certainly have a conversation with yourself and ask yourself, what am I not good at and how can I address that shortcoming? Consider technology, again, to help with those problem areas. Consider working on them to improve them, but one of the best things I ever heard was, what's the point of working on your weaknesses? You might as well just ignore your weaknesses and delegate them and work on your strengths instead, because you're coming from a higher base. And that kind of makes sense to me. So use technology to bridge the weaknesses, work on your strengths instead. But be aware of those weaknesses. That's half the battle. Develop your self-awareness. Number 4, talk to yourself more than you listen to yourself. Question your inner voice, right? It isn't foolproof by any means. Try to impose rational truth on your inner voice. Always ask why you are feeling as you are. Are those reasons valid, or are you being irrational? Are they sort of base instinct rather than being informed by rational objective truth? This is a deep end, folks. This is not easy, right? But talk to yourself more than you listen to yourself. Consider goals, setting goals based on who you want to be rather than what you want to achieve. So ask what someone who is financially independent would do in a given situation. Would they upgrade to the new iPhone 11, or would they stick with the 7 because it's working perfectly well? What would an experienced investor do when markets are tumbling? Would they bail out, or would they hold their nerve? You know the answer. What would I do? You could even ask, what would Pete do? I could press do a line of merch with WWPD on it. What would Pete do? I'm not going to do that. What would I do in a given situation? I'm not perfect by any stretch, but obviously I've been doing this quite a while. So you might ask, what would I do? But ask, what would somebody who is already financially independent, what would an experienced investor do? All right, and use that as a framework. If there is an actual real person who you admire, ask them what they would do, listen to the answer and parse it for yourself and take the best bits. So consider goals based on who you want to be rather than what you want to achieve, okay? Number 6, remember most decisions will not be catastrophic, all right? It's easier, as Neil was saying, to spot some of these biases and behaviors in hindsight, practically impossible in real time. But I think we can give ourselves a little break by understanding that it's rare that any decision you make, if that decision ends up being wrong, it's rare that it will be catastrophic, absolutely, life-ending, right? Generally speaking, nobody's dying here. This is money ultimately, and yes, it's a big deal. But whether or not you have 15 or 10% of your portfolio in emerging markets makes not a jot of difference. And certainly, it'll make a difference, but it certainly won't make or break you. Whether you do panic and bail out at the bottom of the markets, it won't break you, but it will massively hurt you. But most decisions are not that big a deal. All right, so give yourself a little bit of a break. So don't obsess. Lastly, number 7, use commitment devices to make in-the-moment decisions easier. So set up your frameworks in advance of situations which you know are going to be problematic so that they are less so in the moment. So there could be anything, like never making decisions on investments in the evening, never after you've had a glass of wine, only on a Saturday morning where you're rested and you've got a clear mind to think about things. Frameworks for decision making, really, really important. So, hope that's helpful. Quite a lot to think about over the last 2 weeks. We'll never ever get this right, folks. We'll never get it perfectly right. It's a journey, right? But continual improvement is a darn sight better than ignoring it and putting our heads in the sand and hoping that this stuff really doesn't sort of really exist. We need to deal with it to grow up and deal with it as adults, on the understanding that it's a continual journey and we'll never get it right. Okay, so I hope it's been helpful. Here's a review from Natasha606 here in the UK. Best personal finance podcast. Love that. Thank you so much, Natasha. I've been listening to the Meaningful Money podcast for the past year now, and I still continue to learn something new. Brilliant content, Pete. Natasha, I love that. Nice and succinct. If you want to leave me a review, folks, it doesn't have to be long and gushing. Best podcast ever is pretty, I'll take that. So meaningfulmoney.tv/iTunes if you happen to be in the Apple ecosystem. If you're listening on Android or on your PC or whatever, wherever you can leave me a review, please do so, because it helps keep me near the top of the rankings, helps more people to hear about the show, which really helps. Okay, so next time, back to just me, I'm afraid, talking about rolling with the punches, how to bounce back when life knocks you off your wealth-building track a little bit, okay? So rolling with the punches, dealing with setbacks, that's next week's show. So I hope you've enjoyed my conversations with Neil over the last couple of weeks. You know where I am if you've got questions or queries. Don't forget the Facebook group as well, meaningfulmoney.tv/community. Ask questions in there. Great bunch of people all looking to help each other out. So if you've got questions specifically on today's show, meaningfulmoney.tv/pp12. Ask them now. I'll do my best to answer them. And Neil will as well. Thanks for listening, folks. I'll see you next week.